Good afternoon, folks. Welcome to Visordown. My name is Toad, and today we are coming to you from Valencia, where we have been on the launch of Ducati's new Multistrada V2. So we've been out here today riding the S variant of Ducati's new Multistrada V2. We've done about 140 miles on the bike today. We got on at about 8 AM. We got off about 20 minutes ago at about 4 o'clock this afternoon. As ever with my reviews, I'm going to go over everything about the bike, and there is quite a lot because it's an all new model for Ducati. And then after I've done that, I'm going to be telling you how it handled out here on the roads in Valencia. So, as mentioned, all new frame, new suspension system, new everything basically. The engine is all new, the swing arm is all new, from the front to the back, from the bottom to the top. You will notice that gone is the trellis frame, and instead underneath all of the bodywork and the fuel tank up here, we have got a new sort of front monocoque frame, which is a bit sort of similar to the one that you get on the Multistrada V4 and the Panigale and stuff like that, but not quite the same, not quite such an exquisitely engineered item. We still have a trellis subframe, and I've seen a picture of it and it's absolutely beautiful, and they made it look lovely and they painted it red and it looks awesome, and then they covered it in plastic so that you can't see it, which is a massive thumbs down from me. Obviously the biggest news story with this bike though is that new engine, because this is going to be the star of the show in a lot of Ducati's new models in the coming years and months. So it's an 890cc engine. It's dropped down from the 950 that we previously had in the old generation Multistrada V2. It's pumping out 113 bhp, which arrives at about 10,750 rpm, and we've got 67.9 pound-foot of torque. So still a grunty engine, but the torque is made a bit higher in the rev range than the old bike. So the torque arrives at 8,250 rpm, but Ducati claims that 90% of the torque is available from sort of 3,500 right the way through the mid-range and all the way to the top. We have got shorter first and second gears than in the previous bike, and we've got 20% more rotational mass in this bike than we do on the Streetfighter or the Panigale V2 that utilise this new 890cc engine. Of course, we've got the new dual-sided swing arm, which is shared across quite a number of the Multistrada models now. It's not exactly the same as the one found on the V4. It's kind of inspired by, and it keeps that sort of look. You've got on the S model, which is the only one that we've been riding, you've got Showa's Skyhook semi-active electronically adjusted suspension system, which is very, very nice and very, very good. What we don't have any radar assistance. So unlike the Tracer 9 GT Plus that gets radar, blind spot, cruise control, emergency braking assist, all that sort of stuff, this bike doesn't have it. It's got more rider focused electronics is the way that I would best describe it. Braking system at the front, we have got Brembo calipers. They're not the top spec Stylemas. I think they're M3.4s, something like that. We'll put a link, we'll put a caption at the bottom as to exactly what they are, but they're not the cream of the crop Brembo calipers, but they are very much more than up to the job, and they're biting down on 320mm discs. And as you'd expect, like I said, rider focused electronics. This has got full IMU control over the braking system and the traction control system, and you've got proper wheelie control, engine braking control, all of that good stuff. Right, this is a big launch for me, for Ducati, and for the motoring world in general, because the Multistrada V2 is a massive bike. The Streetfighter V2 is a massive bike, and the Panigale V2 is a massive bike. They sell loads and loads of them worldwide, and this has been basically the first taste that the journalists of the world have got to sample Ducati's new V2 engine. It's got a very different character to the outgoing 950. I'm going to say that right off the bat. I'm not saying that it's worse in any way, but it's just a very different character. It's peakier, so you have to rev the engine harder, you have to work a little bit harder, and it hasn't got that thumping, howling pull of torque right from really low in the rev range, where you could just roll on the throttle in third or fourth gear from almost no revs whatsoever, and the thing would just pull like a train and get you to where you're going. So you have to work a little bit harder, use the gearbox a little bit more to make really good progress with it. It does pull nicely from low, but it's just not as traction engine like as the old 950 was. Once you get into the mid-range though, that's where this engine starts to come into its own. So it's got a slightly more square sort of dimensions than the previous model. And once you get into that mid-range, it does shoot through the mid-range exceptionally quickly and it does keep pulling all the way up to that 10,750 red line where peak power is delivered. That said, the performance is still very, very strong. It is still a very, very quick bike. It is lighter than the outgoing 950. The engine is a claimed 5.8 kilogram lighter than the outgoing 950. Overall, Ducati is claiming that this bike is 18 kilograms lighter than the previous generation based on wet claimed weights. And the one thing that I will say about it is very, very agile, much more agile than the previous 950. And I think that is a combination of the change, the reduction in the weight, the change to this front frame design, which has helped to lower the center of mass a bit because it's obviously a lighter component than the old trellis frame. And also updates to the suspension system and so on. It feels really quick. The old 950 was a quick bike. You could get on a nice twisty road and you could have a lot of fun on it. But this thing feels a lot less point and squirt. The old 950 used to get it out of a fast corner and all you really wanted to do was stand it up as quickly as you could, get on the power and just drive the torque all the way up the rev range and just shoot yourself off down the road. This is one of the things that's changed the character of the Multistrada V2 with this edition for me, is that this bike likes a lot more corner speed. You can hold it in a corner, pin it in a corner, pin it on its side and work the revs and work the back brake just to sort of modulate your speed, and it's perfectly happy in that scenario where the previous generation Multistrada 950 V2 was not quite so at home. So you've got this added composure in fast sweeping turns, which is absolutely brilliant, but that isn't at the expense of any stability. There isn't a steering damper or anything on this, but this thing is super composed and super comfortable. Whether or not you're hammering out of a fast corner, down a bumpy road, it just stays perfectly planted and perfectly level. And it is exactly the same on the motorway today. I don't know if you can see the state of the palm trees behind me, but it's stupidly windy here. Like, we came out of my hotel room this morning about sort of 6 o'clock for breakfast, and there were palm trees lying on the side because they've been snapped halfway up. So it's been really windy. We've had a lot of crosswinds to contend with as we've been riding on the highway, but it's been perfectly well behaved. You know, it gets buffeted about a bit. You've got a big side profile, but this thing is very stable in that respect. I did enjoy that on the road, and it was really, that was the bike that we needed today. It was a nice, composed, stable ride that would just get you to where you wanted to go. Just going back to how the character of this bike has changed with regards to the handling and also the engine character. One thing that's been going around in my head all day was that if this was a blind taste test, for instance, if somebody sat me on the back of this bike and took me for a spin down the road and I had a blindfold on and I couldn't see what bike I was on, I wouldn't have initially been able to tell that this was a Ducati that I was riding. Where if it was a Ducati V2, the old 950 engine, or even the 1260S bike I absolutely adored, you'd know straight away that was a Ducati when you were sat on it. You'd feel it through the frame, you'd feel it through the delivery of the bike, and you'd also hear it through the exhaust note. And this has got a much more modern sort of style to it, and the way that it carries itself is a lot more akin to the other bikes in this class that are parallel twin cylinder ones. So this is almost a V-twin or an L-twin engine, as Ducati would put it, with the character of a parallel 270-degree crank, which makes it a bit more like the other bikes in the class. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Skyhook suspension, because that is one thing that has improved over this model over the previous outgoing 950 model. Is they've put a load of work into updating the system, like they did with the Multistrada V4 that I was riding a little bit earlier on last year, at the end of last year. Went to Gubbio to ride the new Multistrada V4. They've massively improved the Skyhook suspension system on the S model of the V2 as well. And what that gets you is a bike that can react beautifully to the way that you're riding and the road conditions that are beneath you. Unless you really focus on it, you won't notice it's doing any of it. So we're riding through town, hit a pothole, hit a speed bump at low speed when you're just pootling along, and the suspension will just soak it up. You'll be bracing for an impact that will never arrive. Then when you get out onto the twisties and you start to get a bit quicker, you start to push the suspension and need a bit more support under acceleration and under braking. That's when the system really comes into its own and it jacks you all up. I also love the adjustability of this, because you can go through the riding modes, sport, rain, road, whatever you want to do, and you can go through them. It'll adjust all the throttle maps, the traction control, the ABS system and the suspension. But then if you want a bit more adjustment, you can dive into the TFT, you can up the preload, you can up the braking support, up the acceleration support at the front and the rear of the bike, and just really dial in a bespoke setting. And that's what I was doing. I sort of jacked the bike up a bit at the back so it wasn't squatting quite so much, increased the compression damping in the front forks as well, just to make it a bit stiffer at the front. And by the end of the day, it was all the suspension system that I'd needed. I didn't have to break out a C-spanner, and I have got absolutely zero knowledge about suspension tuning, which is what an electronic suspension system just like this opens up. Anybody can do it, and you're not going to screw up the way your bike is handling, which is absolutely brilliant. While we're talking about the technology of the bike, I've got to talk a bit about the TFT. So the TFT is beautiful, really nice and clear and easy to read. I've only got one bugbear of it, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But the switchgear that Ducati have wheeled out for the new V2 is also excellent. Compared to some of the other switchgear in this sector, it's really nice and easy to use. You've got a central sort of 5-way joystick with some little arrow buttons around the outside to take you through all the different menus and stuff like that. The cruise control is a bit of a stretch. It's on top of the switch cube, not in the sort of conventional place, but I'd much rather have it there to give you that nice, easy 4-way, 5-way joystick with those buttons around it. Very, very nice, Ducati. I'm loving your work there. The one bugbear that I have with the TFT is that this bike has not got indicator repeater lights, LEDs, on the dashboard. What it's got 2 little graphic arrows on the TFT which tell you when the indicator is on. That's the only thing, you just don't see it. Even if it's nighttime, you're not going to see those things blinking away because they don't actually put out any light. They are just a graphic on the dashboard. That's really my only bugbear of the dash. The rest of it is very clear, very easy to use. When I got on the bike this morning, I switched it into miles per hour and it took me about 30 seconds and I didn't need to ask anyone for help. So that tells you how intuitive it is. If you're looking at the dashboard now and you can see me riding down the motorway and it says I'm doing about 40 or 50 miles an hour, don't worry about it. There was something wrong with the miles per hour calibration on the bike that I was and a few other people on the launch were riding. Apparently that'll all be fixed by the time they hit the dealers. Quick note on the quick shifter, because this is something that I noticed when I was riding it. The gearbox is very nice. The clutch is heavy, so the clutch feels like the clutch on my old 1260S that I rode to World Ducati Week on. The clutch is quite heavy, so if you do a lot of town riding, you are going to build up some quite strong muscles in your left arm riding this thing. I did have one issue though, and that was around the quick shifter. When we were riding the mountain roads, which was when we were really pushing on and pressing hard, you'd come out of first gear, you'd click it into second, and it'd click momentarily, it'd hesitate, and then the bike would buck, and then it would go into second gear. It was almost like the quick shifter and the IMU and the traction control system all had a little bit of a fight for a couple of seconds, and then the gear would engage. I'm going to put some video footage up on screen so you can see for yourself. So here's a little montage of clips where I've clicked the gear and you can see what's happening with the revs and the reaction of the bike and see what you think's going on. So yeah, I'm none the wiser as to what that is. I've spoken to Ducati about it. They're going to have a little look into it, but there weren't any other riders on the launch that had any issues like that. So hopefully it was just an isolated thing with the bike that I was riding. Who knows? Going to talk about the comfort because people go long distances on their Multistradas, and one thing I'm going to say, they've made this bike feel roomier, but they've also made it smaller. The overall dimensions are more compact. It's really, really slim compared to the old bike. Yet up top, it feels roomier. The previous generation 950 Multistrada used to sit in it. You felt like you sat on the seat and the bike was kind of all up here around you. That's all changed now. The tank is much flatter. The bars are incredibly wide, so you've got loads of leverage there, but they are also set quite low. But it's lovely and roomy, up top, down below. There is a high seat version, there's a couple of low seat versions. You can even get a lowering kit to change the linkage on the suspension, which will drop it even further. I think somewhere in the region of about 70 or 80 millimeters is the maximum amount of variance you can get through suspension modifications and seat modifications. So this really is the Multistrada that kind of caters for every rider regardless of their size. Seat comforts are also very nice for a big V-twin, L-twin engine, sorry Ducati. They've actually made it surprisingly vibe-free, which is very nice to see. It feels a lot like the other parallel twins that are out there in the market with their 270-degree cranks. It's very, very smooth, which is all very, very good. So, moving on to the verdict. You know what, if the old Multistrada V2 never existed and I got on this one today and I rode it, I'd think it was absolutely fantastic. I think it was brilliant. I did like a bit of that character. I did like a bit of that belligerent Ducati character that you got with the old bike. I mean, I've got a really old Ducati 600 Super Sport at home, and if you're a gear too high or you're a bit low in the rev range and you ask for a bit of throttle, that will dugga dugga dugga. And that's kind of what the old 950 did, and a lot of other models in the Ducati range did. And it's kind of because they've done that for so long, it's almost that's become a part of the heritage. It's a part of the character of riding a Ducati, and it's what some people liked. Yeah, there was the other side of the old V2 engine where it would boom through the rev range and get you where you were going, just basically just using pure torque from top to bottom. And that was another thing that I liked. I'm not saying this engine is worse, it's just different. And if you're a fan of the old Ducati 950, then there are a lot of good things that Ducati have done to this one to make it a much better bike. The handling is the standout one in terms of the agility and the way that it's so nimble without losing any of that composure and that stability. That is a really, really good feature. It's also a lot smoother. No doubt it's also probably a lot more fuel efficient as well. Well, listen, folks, that is about all I've got to tell you about Ducati's new Multistrada V2S. I hope you've liked that video. If you have, don't forget to drop a like and don't forget to hit subscribe so you can stay up to date with all of Visordown's latest content. And for all the latest news, reviews and motorcycle features, get yourself over to visordown.com. Cheers, folks.